Okay, so we're going to be talking about beyond the area of use, surplus assets. It's quite pertinent actually that in the previous session Lawrence Leader actually referred to the necessity of now, as we're moving through the waves of the area of use, thinking about how we're managing our assets and what asset plan we have and what estates plan we have. And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at this afternoon and giving you a little bit of an idea, something different to think about. You're already doing lots of excellent things in your estates, and that's what we're going to be talking about, something a little bit unusual. First of all, about Everard. We're a multi-professional consultancy, construction consultancy, offering all the standard design, architectural, engineering services, project management services, but also what we help our clients do, which is unusual for a consultancy like ours, is we actually help clients with estate strategies. And when you come to us, you can come to us with a problem. You don't necessarily know what the answer is, and the answer may not be to build anything new or to do anything new. It may be to do something different. And we have 11 offices around the country, and we employ about 450 staff, and that is growing. So that's a little bit about our business. These are some of the colleges that we've been working with. So in terms of our college experience, we do have a broad range of colleges that we've worked with, and that ranges from doing small condition survey work right through to brand new facilities and anything in between. So we do offer the whole gambit of services in terms of estate and estate support. So what we have here, I don't know if we have any scientists in the room. Basically, I've likened this to a distilling process. What we have over here is the 328 colleges before area reviews, all bubbling around in this big jar of college education. And the balls are jostling against each other, they're not working together quite so well. In between the individual balls, there's these areas of space, and that's where the inefficiency is, because they're not joined up and working together. And then as we go through the area review process, we're going to be ending up with something which ends up probably with bigger structures. They're probably going to be a different shape. I don't know if you've thought about that. We're going through a process of change, of coordinated change, but we're not necessarily going to end up with bigger balls. And therefore, and you'll see that the shapes then, deliberately so on here, graphically show that there is less gaps, less spare space, and hopefully less wastage, and that's where we're going to be starting to drive out efficiency. The whole aim of the area reviews is just that: financially viable, sustainable, resilient and efficient, and something that delivers maximum value for public sector investment. That's one tall order, isn't it? When we're already in a situation where money is really difficult, and it's difficult to make ends meet in that. So going through the area review is about organisational change. What will come out of that is, in actual fact, as well as having colleges working together more closely in terms of curriculum and delivery, they will also be bringing their estates together, and they'll be needing to look at their estates and not you may have duplications of provision. You may have parts of the estate that actually no longer serve a purpose in your new learning environment. What are you going to do with those estates? Some of them will need to be refurbished and reused in a different way. Some of them actually may become surplus. And I think in all of that, there becomes a new opportunity, and there's a new opportunity there actually to drive out financial stability. So what are the options? Under the area review process, when you get we're talking about estate, you could do nothing. You could just use it as you're using it now. I think it would be a real shame if that was the case, because all you're effectively doing is sticking a new badge on what was before. So all those many balls in that jar haven't become a new shape anymore. They've just continued still jostling against each other, and there's still the gaps. There's still the wasted and inefficiency. You could dispose. Yeah. And I'm not saying that any one of these I think it's a mixture of these things, which I'm putting up here now. It's not any one of them is the total answer. You will have some need for some disposals, because there are times when you do need to create that immediate one-off capital receipt, but with disposal of surplus estate, once it's sold, it is lost. And if in the future you need additional estate, it's going to be more costly for you actually to find that and purchase it back. You will be very aware that we have a problem going through primary and secondary schools of pupil numbers and pupil spaces in schools. There's been this whole flux, this volume of students coming through the system. At some point they are going to be hitting the FE sector. So whilst there might be a lull in student numbers now, I do think that in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to see that rising quite rapidly. So you may have surplus estate now, but you may want to strategically plan and think, what if we had a bulge in pupil numbers? What if we needed to hold on to that estate, that piece of building that we're not using right now, for the future? That's one option, is disposal. Another option is retain as spare capacity. But that facility, if you're not using it effectively, actually is costing you. It's not a nil value. Unless you mothball it, even if you mothball it, you probably still have to secure it and make sure that it's kept in reasonable repair. If you keep it just as spare capacity that you use occasionally, you've still got to heat it, light it, and all of those things. So it doesn't come at a non-cost. It might be, if you know in 18 months' time you need extra capacity, that might be a good option for you. But if that's not on your radar, then I would suggest to retain it as spare is probably not the best thing. Spread out. How many times? I've been into many schools, colleges, and also police when I've been working with them, and they've had spare facility, and what they've done is they've allowed their staff to suddenly have their own office and spread out. That's great when you're doing the spreading out, but when you're doing the we need it back now, everyone feels like you're taking something away from them. So it doesn't always work great in the long term. If it means you're just going to use it and keep it maintained, that might be a short-term solution. But long-term solution, it just means it's just making your inefficiency even more inefficient. The next one is retain and revenue. The alternative actually to selling something is actually using it for a different purpose. And we're going to be talking about a case study in a moment, and this is the bit you've all been waiting for, I think, where you're actually holding on to your existing estate and you'll use it for something different. That may be related to learning and it may not be related to learning. And we're going to give you an example in a moment which isn't related to the college estate at all. But I think, and it's a challenge I would lay open to you actually, give me something really difficult on one of your estates and I will show you how you can use it in a different way. Because when you see the case study in a moment, if we can do something different with that and make a revenue from it, I think we probably could do something with lots of your unusual, quirky buildings that are sitting on the edges of your sites that you think, we can't do anything with this. Okay. So just picking up on the distilling analogy, talking about the surplus estate, what we're doing is thinking about, okay, we've got this spare piece of building that we don't need anymore, we don't need at the moment, don't want to sell it, and we want to create a revenue from it. In order to get to anything, an idea that is innovative and fresh and new, you need to go through a process of filtering. And what we've done with the particular client that we're going to be showing you in a moment is we actually had all the ideas on the table and we sifted them and we filtered them. We went through a real strategic process, a logical process of working out what actually could commercially work for this client to give them a revenue. But to start with, we had to allow all of the ideas to come to the table, however ridiculous. And we did allow that, and we did have some ridiculous ideas come to the table. But then we didn't just discount it because we thought it was ridiculous. We discounted it on the basis that we'd chosen that for these reasons it couldn't work. So gradually we came down and we started to come up with some reasonable ideas, but we still didn't know how to develop those ideas into something that was commercial for the client. Just occasionally, in that idea brainstorming process, and in this particular instance, we had one idea which we kept coming back to, and it almost stopped people thinking outside of, I don't like using the term, but outside of the box. And in the end, we had to sort of park that idea. Can we not come back to that idea just for now? Because otherwise we're not going to think about all the various things that we might be able to do with your building to provide you with a commercial return. And once we'd done that, the floodgates just opened. We just had lots of our options and ideas, and we're now going to be talking through the process that we're in at the moment. The case study is actually 2 chapels. I'm just going to set the scene for Paul. He's going to be going through the detail in a moment. We have 2 beautiful Grade 2 listed chapels located in the middle of a cemetery. The client, they no longer serve the purpose. They were originally designed for funeral service chapels. Then they were converted into crematorium chapels, and they don't work especially well. The client is at a point where they've got to replace the crematorium kit that, and all of the background stuff that happens in the chapels. And they decided at that point that it was time to actually build something purpose-built for them. And the 2 chapels potentially could sit in the middle of the site and effectively become mothballed and actually become a cost, because they would become run down, they would be vandalised, and it would be such a shame that 2 beautiful buildings that they are would go to rack and ruin. So I'm going to introduce Paul just to talk us through where we go from here.
So I'm just going to show you the sort of 3 final solutions that we've looked at for it, and these are all, they all have legs. So first option was serviced office accommodation. This is just a quick feasibility of the layout. You can see each different area, different colour, is a different unit proposed. Unit 3 up there, the pink area, that was actually going to be, that is the crematorium plant at the moment. We tear it out, but it's a huge space and something that it's definitely viable. So units 1 and 2, larger facilities. Units 4 and 5, the small, the green and the brown area, and the pink area to the right. In the middle, we create like a combined entrance circulation kitchen area and utilise the existing WC and kitchen facilities in the corner. So it's reasonably easy to convert. Cost-wise, it was working okay. And in terms of local plan, parking requirements and things, the existing site allowed for that reasonably well. Second option was serviced apartments or a landmark trust potentially. I don't know if anybody knows the landmark trust, but they take buildings that are of value, convert them into hotel accommodation. So we looked at potentially how that could work, and also how it could work as individual serviced apartments on a sort of more long-term basis. Out of all the options that we went through, this one actually was probably gave the most return for the client, but it was a little bit more edgy in terms of actually being able to do it. The planners weren't as keen on it as perhaps office accommodation, but it was something that could be done. Another thing we suggested, maybe mezzanine structures, putting those into the existing fabric of the building. Being listed, it's reasonably hard to do. You can't touch the existing fabric. You'd have to suspend them in there. So the cost, you've got further cost when you look at acoustically separating the spaces, whereas the office accommodation, it's not as rigorous. So that was the second solution. Third solution, and this is kind of a hybrid that came through with discussion with stakeholders through a local agent who knew the area. And this was sort of a mixture. There was a selection of offices, probably for funeral-related businesses. So you've got maybe a undertaker here, groundskeepers here. Again, it allowed to retain the existing sanitary accommodation in the kitchens, so the cost of doing that was relatively cheap. It's not as expensive as the residential scheme. And then in here, there was a suggestion of a wake facility, so it could deal with wakes from the main facility to the east. And when that's not actually being utilised, it potentially could be a cafe for people in and out of the cemetery. It's a big cemetery, it's the only cemetery in the city, so it's very well utilised, and obviously with the crematorium to the east, it would be quite busy. Also, turns out this has been out in the local area, and Costa's actually interested in potentially taking this on. To the top, a retail unit that potentially could deal with wreaths, flowers, headstones, that kind of thing.
Just on this is where this becomes really exciting actually, because we've got a building here which probably 6 months ago the client thought they knew it was going to be surplus, they no longer needed it. It's not really high residential in terms of even if they could convert it into a residential unit, I'm not sure many people would wish to live in the middle of a cemetery. Its location sets it apart. You know, what do you do with such an unusual building? Obviously grade 2 listed, you're limited as to how much you can actually alter it as well. And so we were really excited and enthused actually by the 3 options of the many options that we explored. All 3 options that we have investigated have a commercial potential for the client. And that's going to give them in the range of anything between £150,000 to £250,000 worth of income a year by changing the use of this building, and that's extra money for them. This particular option is the one that we're most excited about, because we already have 3 the office units. We already have 3 people who have asked to be taken forward in that. And as I say, we already have Costa who are really interested on taking over the running of the cafe. And if you can get a name in like Costa, then other businesses follow, because everyone thinks, well, if there's a Costa there, people will want to go for a coffee. So yes, I want to be linked with that. That it gives the whole thing a little bit more emphasis and impact. Some of the considerations. In developing our ideas, we worked really closely with the council to make sure that anything that was suggested for use of the chapels aligned with their local priorities and supported what they were trying to do as an area. It was really important that we showed that we were doing that, because obviously anything that council members are going to support, they want to be able to promote it as part of supporting their local agenda. So local priority in terms of enabling better provision for bereavement services, understanding what the local competition is, and the commercial appetite. Do we have people actually who want to move into a space like this, or are we just creating a space that actually is still going to be end up being empty? That doesn't appear to be the case at all. Very early on, we identified that for each of the options there was key people that we needed to speak with and to draw in to the conversation, so that we could test our ideas as much as anything. Was there an appetite? For example, the serviced office solution, which isn't the preferred solution, but there is still a need for serviced offices in this area. So in actual fact, that may well lead on to another project. It may lead on to another consideration for another part of their estate, which actually might be better suited for serviced offices, because there is definitely a requirement for serviced offices, which we've uncovered in our investigations. In terms of constraints, I probably need to ask you a little bit more about the constraints of the building. Yeah,
you've got constraints of the fabric of the building, but at the same time you've got constraints of local planning policies and how those two tie together. And key for this early on with us was to speak to the planning authority and understand whether any of those schemes or all of those schemes would be an acceptable solution. And any that weren't were discounted. The 3 that we've got actually are 3 that they felt that they could go with. Also, obviously being a listed building, we had English heritage that we needed to consult and conservation officers, but every job has different constraints and therefore different consultees.
One constraint that has been particularly unusual on this one is the legality of actually changing the use of the chapels because they are sitting on consecrated ground. So we've had to go through a further process of checking the legals on that, because it is a little bit more complicated unpicking that element of it. In terms of the business model, I can see some faces around the room thinking, I haven't got time to do this, and I absolutely understand that. You've got your day jobs to do. And so it's really key at the outset when you're setting up your estate strategy and you decide that you've got something surplus and you're going to do something different with it to try and generate some income for you. You don't have to run it and manage it. It's becoming very clear actually that this facility here is likely to be managed by others, and in actual fact the council will just be the landlord. They will retain the ownership of it, and they will receive less income by having it managed by others, but in fact they've reduced their risk in doing so as well. But some of them, one of the serviced office option, we actually were talking about having it run by the council. Because they felt that they had the capacity with their own internal staff resourcing adjustments and things. They probably had somebody who probably would fit that role to actually solve two problems for them. So, but think about your business model at the outset, because then it's a different conversation you have with your potential suppliers. Because Costa, for example, if Costa comes into this building, they will know who's going to be their day-to-day contact for things if services aren't working or what have you, and that's not necessarily going to be the council. And it's having that discussion very early on and not being afraid of doing something different or new, or entering into a partnership, you know, a joint venture and having different roles. That's another way of doing it. The financials. It was really important. The highest return option was the holiday let, the landmark trust idea. That was at the top end of return, but it was also at the top end of risk. Because if the landmark trust if they wanted to take this property on, it meant that an element of the risk of it not being booked was going to be carried by the council, which then meant effectively, their return, whilst it could be a lot higher, it could be a lot less. And the council in this instance are preferring to go for something that is probably less at the outset, but more certain. And that's a choice. It depends very much what you're doing, what you're involved with, and how much knowledge you have of what you might be using the facility for, whether you see it as a bigger risk or less. So we've had all of these ideas going into the big pot. We've churned a few, and we now have 3 that are potentially good ideas, and we are coming very quickly through this process of identifying the winner in terms of option. In deciding it's quite an emotive subject, and some of the stakeholders are really fond of their old chapels, even though they don't provide the service or the space that the crematorium needs now. And there's been some real, not tears, but quite emotive conversations about the moving away from the chapels. And obviously those people need to be able to assess the options for this in a very, almost in a cold way, and then you get a true answer. And so this is just a snapshot of it. There's quite a lot of assessment criteria which were developed with the client, but we've tried to actually break it right down and strip it right back so that people can make a decision that they can stand by. So it isn't based on somebody's emotional attachment to the chapels or particular preference for one commercial decision or other. So I just wanted to show you that there was some rationale behind that. When we get the right idea, it's going to look like that. And this is where we start edging towards financial stability. So we've now got a facility that was going to be spare. So we started off. The principal objective of the whole exercise was actually to raise funding from a surplus asset. And if we've identified the best use of that asset, then what we're hoping is, in actual fact, the commercial venture will drive the need for the asset. So in actual fact, what you've now got is a business facility which is running from originally a surplus asset, but coming out of that, we've also identified that we might need serviced offices. So that might lead on to something else which also brings an income. But do you see where I'm heading with that? In that, in actual fact, it's now not based on the the asset being spare, which is where we started, is actually the business opportunity that it presents and the fund that is now going to be, the revenue that's now going to be possible. And that leads to financial stability and growth. It's different to what you do now. It's thinking about your estate in a different way. I don't apologise that it wasn't a college estate example. The reason we chose this particular example is because it had so many differences and challenges in it that I'm sure across your estate you've got those odd spaces that you think, I don't know what to do with it, we don't need it, we don't want it. I would challenge you in that we probably, if we could find a good commercial use for the chapels, we probably could help you find a good commercial use for that spare building.